Sup, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and once again, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And today, we're going to take a look at Ghost Recon Breakpoint. What happens when Ubisoft gets one of today's television's leading men, wraps them up in a Wildlands-style setting, focuses on story, and then rubs a heap full of future world conspiracy into a game? Well, you get Wildlands 2.0, or in this case, World 2.0, as those on the island call it. Breakpoint's out now if you got it early from a purchase from Ubisoft with one of their packages. Otherwise, it's out on the 4th. So let's sit down and see if Breakpoint's the culmination of what Ubisoft has learned from their past titles, or if it's just going to show that even gamers with wallets thicker than Italian mafia still have a breaking point. As always, if you like this video, give it a subscribe, hit the notification bell, or hell, go out there and find another YouTuber, somebody small who doesn't have a lot of support, somebody you've watched before, and subscribe to them. So here's my review for Breakpoint. Graphics are up first. Breakpoint has almost no positives without negatives attached right to them. It's a large open world. It's a mix of various terrains like swamp, mountainous regions, and deep forest lands that really actually do impress, especially on first glance. Like that first moment when you just helped someone out by giving them a second breath hole and you're scooting across the enemy's lands being chased by two-legged bloodhounds and the wind's blowing through the grass in these long patterns with mist flowing around your feet and a new day's sun breaks through the trees. Or flicking an enemy's off switch from 200 yards away and watching them fold into a heap and falling into undergrowth. The environment can absolutely impress, especially at a distance. And distance really is the name of the game here, because if they did one thing right, it's the sense of distance. Crossing a creek to get into the backside of an enemy camp and then wallowing around in the filth to blend in does do wonders to make the world feel very interactive as well. The best parts of Breakpoint are experienced out in that open world, just moving from place to place to place. Also, I dig the texturing when you go full camo with mud splattered all over you from top to bottom, and you can come up looking like Arnold in the Predator movie after hiding. That is good stuff. Until you realize that running into a mud puddle will occasionally just splat you with that exact same body mud spray, but we'll get to that in a moment. Also, what is it with this guy? I just have to point out that he's absolute shit at making himself blend in. Good job not covering the giant pink side of your face, bro. It's like he walked outside after combing just half of his head. And that's really a good reminder of the issues in Breakpoint. It never puts a foot forward without putting another foot back and then somehow sprouting a third foot so it can shove that right in its yawning gape hole as it pulls off just another graphical faux pas. First, the world itself can look good, but it's a wash in cut and pasted experiences and locations. In particular, locations of a lot of the events that you're going to follow, especially whenever you enter an enemy's base or camp base or BAMP or whatever you want to call it. Internal textures in those areas are decidedly poor looking compared to the outside locations, and everything has a stamped in place look to it, like Ubisoft grabbed 100 feet of whatever they thought was really the best parts of the game, then hit Control V and then just started macroing Control C everywhere in the game world, copy pasting world items, enemies, and location elements wherever they wanted. And sure, you can just not really go into those parts. That would be one plan, but that'd be like beating the shit out of a bathroom scale because you ate 4 cheesecakes before you jumped on it. It's missing the point of the entire mechanism that's being tested. And it's very easy to go jetting around a corner on a motorbike to find a silver-towered monstrosity just sitting in the middle of the road like they pasted it there. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's enough that it's easily recognizable and ruins a lot of the organic feel in the game, especially if you're not 5 sheets to the wind when you're playing this. It's a noticeable step down from Wildlands and definitely Division 2 even. But there are a lot of profoundly beautiful places in the game. Take, for instance, the rocky regions of the south. They elicit this very real feeling of the hills in Afghanistan with crumbled ridges leading through twisting paths back down to the valley floor, and offers a unique location compared to the rest of the game world. That is until you start realizing every 100 feet there's a motorbike and 3 people standing next to it. And that's not a joke. Every goddamned 100 feet. They're everywhere. Listen, if you're having that many problems with your gear, maybe you shouldn't buy it from the back end of some questionable white van next time. To see the massive drop in quality here versus their past games, from the snowy New York in Division to the cluttered, broken down streets in Division 2, even the rural areas splitting enemy outposts in Odyssey, it's really telling. It's just completely, utterly generic. Good world design is a mixture of organic elements combined with those that further gameplay to create a visual representation of workable solutions for the myriad situation that gamers going to find them in. But here, it's like someone said, let's make some cookies, but instead of using a cookie cutter, they just screamed at the batter and hoped it'd form itself. Also, animation-wise, the game is somehow worse than their previous titles, at least in a lot of places. Your character can't move sideways when prone, meaning instead of turning around, you're like a fucking kid making snow angels in place to move left or right. Climbing over items often shows you not interacting with them at all. Everything feels basic and almost stamped in. And then we get to the cutscenes. I haven't seen this much cost saving since my grandpa tried to build a chainsaw out of a go-kart engine and a bit of razor wire fencing. A couple of the main characters look fine. They have acceptably detailed textures. However, most of the characters look decidedly poor. Go into the main base of the Resistance, and it's like everyone took turns holding each other's feet and bobbing for apples in Nevada Botox. Details are gone. Characters look decidedly almost early generation at times. They have this weird lack of detail to them. And yes, all this is post the Day Zero patch. But then all of a sudden, John will show up and he looks like he's from a completely different game. It's like they had a crush on him. Every time he shows up, he looks like the shiny new kid in class compared to the doughheads that stand around him. It's decidedly uneven. At times beautiful and at other times almost coyote ugly. If Breakpoint is anything, it's diverse. This all brings us to performance. Luckily, the final product does perform better than the betas, but it's not world-shattering. Firstly, even on Ultra, there are still all kinds of crazy pop-in with trees changing from Lego block-looking pieces in front of you to their more natural selves, like some 3-year-old melts them down mid-draw. The game also has some tremendous drops in some areas, and 4K with all the settings on high, with an i7 and a 2080 Ti, can go from 80 FPS to 40 FPS while looking at a bush. It isn't close to being steady. Luckily, you can adjust some settings, and there is a dynamic render scale there. Now, for mid-level performance, 1070 can get you the game to 1080p resolution above 60 FPS if you adjust some settings, and a 1080 Ti does hit right around 1440p at 60. When it comes to consoles, the base systems are acceptable but see FPS drops. Even the Pro and the Xbox X running at 4K upscale of some sort at 30 FPS have some drops, especially noticeable when you have more than one player on the screen in multiplayer or in co-op of any kind, especially when a bunch of explosions are going down. When it comes to Breakpoint, it is decidedly hit and miss. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
Bravo 3 is down!
Locals got water here. And some supplies.
Can you believe this place, man? God damn.
And let's do music first. This is actually a very somber set of pieces, much like Depression and Lithium Minor, that I actually did not expect. Also, I like the battle music a lot. It has the same blood-boiling pattern of bass beats that you get pumped up in other games, but there's something about the way it's mixed with the synths as the enemies start to close in that I really did like. It works to add a feeling of desperation. It's not as in-your-face as most shooter-based games' music is. That brings us to voice. John does a standout job here. He does the scenes well. He's chewing up the scenery left and right, leading a feeling of menace to the character that's at the very least a step above the rest of the cookie-cutter enemies you faced here or in Wildlands. Also, I like most of the characters in the main base and those you meet along the way in your travels. However, it also feels decidedly lean on character interaction. For instance, when getting mission data from characters, there's some cut-off feeling there. For example, you walk up to somebody and be like, "Excuse me, don't mind the brain matter all over my face, but I was looking for this little breakfast nook that had eggs you could just die for." And then the NPC will pause for a long period of time and then say, "I've told you everything I know." This happens a lot, and it gives a mechanical feeling to a part of the side quest that really hurts it. Also, the enemy's one-liners will get old incredibly fast. It always makes you wonder why they don't record just a couple more lines, because after the first hour, you're going to get really tired of everyone talking about just how rich the Skell Company is. In a game many times based on listening and tracking enemies, that is a big miss and really does hurt the feeling of environment and immersion. And that brings us to sound. First, the good. Environmentally, I love the overall sounds of the world. When a thunderstorm hits, it hits with a concussive blast that shockwaves out from the strike's location, or the heavy sound of wind whipping around a field near a solar panel array, and you can actually hear water lapping up against beaches from a good deal away, or the scratch of the grass blowing around you. That's all excellent, especially when you get into one of the game's vehicles, whose handling is much better now than it was in Wildlands, by the way, and you start breaknecking it over hills. Also, I gotta say, explosions are fantastic. They have a very deep tonal point to them. If you have a good sound system, that is. They can also be shocking in their depth. Drop a grenade at an enemy's feet, and that wave of sound is deafening and right where it should be. Frustratingly enough, almost everything else in this game is completely wrong when it comes to sound. It's so not good, it's almost astounding. First, the mix and the distance tracking is completely off. You can hear people talking 200 yards away like they're standing right in front of you, and that can make stealth gameplay a complete travesty. Admittedly, they did fix some issues in the Day Zero patch, and they say more are coming, but that's a bit like buying a rocking chair then promising you'll rock sometime in the future. At this point, it's just a chair in a corner with really fucked up legs. The guns sound poor, from the popcorn popper sound of the handguns to the muted and neutered sound of some of the heavy rifles that have all the impact of pointing your finger at an enemy and just going, die. I'm not sure how this turned out so poor. Everywhere and everything has a very muddy and squished feeling to it. And there's very little tail end to some of the larger rifles. This can reduce a 50 caliber to some kind of intimate candlelit dinner instead of the fiery inferno of complete fuckery one of these things is going to sound like when fired up close. Games based purely on guns and equipment like this really should elevate the sound of the guns to a point where they add to the reality of the situation and aid in the tells of good damage done to bad people. Breakpoint doesn't. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. You play as Nomad, a member of the Ghosts, betrayed right at the starting of the game, and it hinges on you being the only one who can bring justice to those people wronged as you hightail it across the open world expanse of a fictional island, Perry Masoning it as the only way a true detective can, by killing everyone within 100 yards of a piece of evidence, then stealing it and running off. To progress in the game and its stories, much of what you do feels like Division Light or Wildlands, with you going to locations to uncover evidence that leads you further into the game world, upgrading your character gear score by finding guns and armor in special crates, or by killing enemies and then occasionally jumping on a motorbike and Travis Pastranaing it through the swamps. As you move forward through the story main missions, side missions, faction missions, and other missions, they'll all unlock for you, which can be chosen and then pinned to your HUD, 3 total, from your objective board. New missions can also be unlocked when just traversing the landscape as well, or back at your main base. Now, it could be easy to just sit here and be like, this is all the things that Ghost Recon Breakpoint is missing. You see, originally Breakpoint was about to be survival, for instance. When you camped and go to the main resistance headquarters, you can do things like make food, prepare notes on enemies, and so forth, with each giving you a 60-minute buff to a statistic, like more damage done to enemies or being more resistant to damage. But due to the way the game plays now, you don't have those things. It doesn't matter. Originally, it was going to be about sustaining injuries in the field and the repercussions. Here now, you just hold G to wrap yourself up like a Delta Force mummy, and then you continue on. It was supposed to have the aforementioned AI teammates to flesh out the groups. That's another thing, not in the game. But that doesn't mean that what's here can't be enjoyable. For instance, the stealth setting. While having its own issues, it's still fun to play with. If you're found by enemies, you can cover yourself in mud or leaves or whatever's handy and you can go full stealth, meaning everyone but the most resilient enemy will walk right over the top of you and you can stealth kill them from the long grass. The highlight, once again, for a game like this is the gear, though, with tons of guns separated into various categories like ASR, sniper, and otherwise that you can upgrade as well as trade out for higher level rifles. Now, yes, none of that makes sense in the long run, and it never has in these games. You can be running around with a 40th level SCAR, and then you have a 48th level one just resting there. Like Division and other titles before it, the gear score is average to indicate your overall level, with some areas having warnings that particular gear levels are needed. One excellent part here is that regardless of the gear score, headshots will kill enemies unless they have like a huge helmet on. Then it'll need 2, one to break it off and one to kill them. This means that if you go for the body, yes, higher level enemies are bullet soaks, but if you don't, you can actually progress a great deal of the way through the game without really needing to worry about the gear score. I like that, but it does continue to progress the feeling that this game just doesn't know what it wants to be. Also, there's a class system. There are 4 classes you can choose from here with their own special abilities, and you can switch in the field, but you can also buy a larger number of perks. Now, perks will make you run faster, give you special abilities to your drone, mark enemies nearby, mark resources in the game world, and like a digital Russian nesting doll, you can buy perks that add more spots for even more perks. And for example, I like a perk that I have. It drops a ninja smoke bomb on the ground and makes you invisible for a short period of time. It's very helpful if you find yourself in some tough spot. But that might be a very rare thing for most gamers. You see, gunplay in this is sadly pretty much bog standard, which for players not that skilled, it'll actually be pretty nice. For instance, some of the weapons have hilarious laser pointing kinds of aiming, and while there's a button to hold your breath with like sniper rifles to get a more stable shot, the moment you even aim down the barrel of that thing, you're going to realize there is simply no reason to use it. This can make it feel a little bit like you're just slinging frozen hot dogs at a robot's head, and I mention robots because damn, the AI is not very good, even on hard or extreme, which really just makes them more aware and do more damage damage versus actually performing overall better at movement and tactics in the field, never really nails it. There are times where the AI makes Wildlands' Death DMV lines seem downright short in comparison. For instance, if you come to an enemy base, you can sneak in, use stealth to sneak about the enemies, take them down, even carry their bodies off so other bad guys won't find them. However, another way you can take on a base is to walk up to the road going in and literally just shoot at the road, and the enemies will come right down the center of the road shooting back at you. Plant some mines on either side of the road, and it's pretty much game over for the AI. If there's a door or an opening nearby, and trust me, there usually is these guys' idea of security is putting a road barricade at the end of an airport runway and just yelling, "Seems safe." Sometimes they'll run through those, but it's outstandingly easy to completely confound the AI in this game. And that doesn't mean you can't die. You absolutely can if you put yourself in a bad position. However, especially when it comes to first part of engagements with a little bit of setup, you're going to find this notoriously easy. So I would say set it at minimum to hard, if not extreme. The character never really moves like you expect, and it feels like there's a noticeable heaviness that exists here that seems like it's a legacy idea from the more strategic and stealthy ideas that the game was originally supposed to expose us to. Instead, you get a character that hangs up on every object except for the one damned object you want, which is the cover, because the cover system is not very good. It's a soft cover system with you having to rub up against the landscape to enact it, but sometimes that doesn't work, and the game has very little in the way of graphical hints that some places are cover and some aren't. None of that's helped by the UI. It's cumbersome, it's slow, and nothing makes, well, sense. No map indicator points towards you having been to a location prior, resulting in you spin around thinking, did I actually go there? Also, everything is astronomically slow, from breaking down weapons when you have to wait for a bar, then wait for the game to take seconds to move all your guns to close the space that the gun you just sold or broke down took in your inventory. Now, at some point, you're going to come in from the cold and hang out in your own camp or the main resistance camp, where you can join up with others, discuss battles, the weather, the bad face texturing, or just buy guns. And speaking of buying, it's weird to me that the game has bugs, sound issues, and AI issues, but somehow magically the friggin' microtransactions work perfectly. Literally everything in here is a microtransaction. Actually, one thing is not, but it was there day one. They just removed it later, and that was the ability to buy skill points. You can buy guns and packs of guns and armor and packs of armor and items that are locked just in the microtransactions. You can also buy fake money with your real money, but only in weird denominations so that you subtly spend more than you expected because you really wanted that snorking shirt of a pelican taking a shit on a birdhouse. Here, you simply can't grind for a number of the items that are coldly locked behind the chastity belt like micros that Ubisoft has strapped into the game. Also, I was one of the first to be into the live game at the hub, and there was like 2 other people, and the store already labeled one of the purchase amounts as most popular. Most popular is a category informed by data jack-offs. It's not a wish list. Unless you took like one person's purchase data and just instantly labeled it that, we all know that's not what happened though. Lastly, you have co-op, as I said before, and meeting up with others is easy enough. You also have PvP, which does balance everyone, but that means that the exceptional gear you have just won't instantly mainline your opponents. It was actually enjoyable with a good team, but right now, that's sort of few and far in between. And that brings us to fun factor, and guys, this is a weird one. It's enjoyable at times. The PvP I actually enjoyed. Again, it depends on your team. The co-op is fun. You could pretty much say even a crap game can be fun in co-op though. So removing that and just saying the game itself, there were elements I liked. I will say I liked it a little less than Wildlands, which I gave a wait for a deep, deep sale. And I can see why there's a lot of comparisons between those. Certainly when you look at the HUD, when you look at the other elements of this game, it'll remind a lot of people of Division in a way, especially with that gear system. I think what you have here is a game that, despite all of its idiosyncrasies, and there are many, there's also something to be enjoyed here if you just want to jump in and shoot around. It just depends on the price you want to jump into it at. Also, there's no denying things like the driving around is fixed. It is much better in this game than it was in other games. Getting inside of a helicopter and just taking off, those can all be quite enjoyable. Also, even if you ignore the gear system, there's a lot of weapons here to run around and shoot. That AI does diminish that a bit. Speaking of AI, blop. Anyway, overall, I would say it was enjoyable at times. And now it's time for the rating. I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, rent, or never touch again rating system. And as you guys know, I buy a copy of every single game I get a code for, even if the developer gives me one. So my cash is on the line just like yours. This is how I feel about what I got. I will say this is a wait for a deep, deep sale. It's just like Wildlands, which means a lot of people may like it a lot more than me. I can get that and I can completely understand it. But for me, there was a lot of issues I did not like. And then when you add on the top of like those AI issues, that really did end up sucking a lot of the fun factor out. However, a never touch really means never touch. It means $0. This is something that people can get more fun out of than $0. That's why that never touch is so hard to get, because it really does have to be an absolute crap game. And there's so many variations, so many different things that people will like. But I would say wait for a deep sale is a good price here. Get it on sale. Get it once it's patched up, once some of those things are fixed. And I absolutely believe they will be. But right now, I would say if you're going to jump in to this game, absolutely know what you're getting into. If you liked Wildlands, you'll most likely like this, but I think some people who think it's going to be identical to Wildlands and in fact have some of that jump in and out fun may actually be just a little bit disappointed. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. You can always check out Reddit and Twitter. And I have my own Anchor and iTunes where I drop the reviews as well as all the different stuff I do on audio. And you can become a patron on the Patreon website. That helps me continue to give you guys these reviews that aren't 2 minutes or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.